Welcome back, friendos. If you're an MMO player, you've no doubt encountered the same frustrations as me. While the rest of the games industry has seen progress, the MMO genre is at best stuck in amber, and at worst, regressing. There was one big announcement a few years ago that people, myself included, hoped would bring change for the better, but so far might have actually made things worse. I'm talking about Unreal Engine 5. It seems like every single new MMO has made in Unreal Engine 5 slapped on the front of the trailer as a selling point. But what I'm seeing both in community sentiment as well as my own experience playing these games, it's having the opposite effect that they intend. They're saying made in Unreal Engine 5 because that's supposed to be exciting, but so far it's been nothing but disappointment. I'm not ready, of course, to throw my hat in with the idea that Unreal Engine 5 is the literal devil, or that it's already one of the four horsemen of the MMORPG apocalypse to go alongside Korean, Kickstarter, and mobile. We're not quite there yet, but I will admit that there's a worrying trend, and we're only a few releases away from me being comfortable in saying, yeah, stick it with the other three. First, let me explain the elephant in the room about why there is a massively negative sentiment about massively multiplayer online role-playing games. I think this can be fairly summarized with a lack of progression, innovation, or in most cases, a loss of vision for what true MMOs used to be. Let's be real, most of the MMO audience tend to be older, or at least the MMO audience that find it difficult to play the currently popular titles, and therefore people that are more likely to be having this conversation. Due to being older, they likely grew up playing MMOs when the genre was very different. This is usually a topic where somebody is about to come in, push their glasses up their nose and say, well, actually, guys, it's you who has changed. You're no longer a teenager. The games aren't the problem. It's just rose-tinted glasses. It's just nostalgia, etc., etc. Every genre changes over time. This is observable. It's unreasonable to believe ours wouldn't. But it's still important to know and recognize that it has. Older MMOs focused on a completely different audience. It was a totally different way of playing games. They were designed with a different mindset in mind, and they play nothing like modern MMOs do. No doubt we have changed alongside them. No doubt we play games differently than we used to, but the core design is noticeable. MMOs used to be designed around keeping you playing year-round, long-form progression, social interaction core to the gameplay, a journey from start to end. Endgame wasn't really a thing many people reached, and it wasn't seen as the ultimate experience of the game. It wasn't the case of you've got to play a couple hundred hours before you get to the fun part. The fun part just was the game. It was the experience of being in the shared online world. It was a novelty, of course, because we didn't have this before, but if you go play some of these older games, you will notice that there is still a feeling of something else there. Many games now instead focus on getting you to the end game, catching you up to the current patch, putting you where most of the players are, selling you as much stuff as possible, giving you as much solo content as possible, treadmills of repeatable content, basically just getting you to the action as quickly as they can. Don't overburden you with choices, don't put barriers in your path, and just try to keep you engaged as much as possible. This can be summed up really if you look at the concept of seasons, right? It's a relatively new-ish concept in games, and MMOs have been adopting them lately. It's the same idea, replace season with the idea of patch cycles or expansions that move the goalposts from a evergreen stretch of content that spans years to whatever the current place is. Don't continue to grow what was already there. Just make a smaller area where everyone's going to congregate and allow people to hop in faster. It makes sense. Less time invested, more rewards, everything as quickly as they can. Somewhat a direct opposite of the roots that created the genre in the first place. And from that description, you might think I'm saying that this is bad, and I don't necessarily feel that way. I still enjoy modern MMOs sometimes. I'm not of the opinion that things I don't like all the time should go away, or things that aren't my cup of tea shouldn't exist. And they are just different from the first 10 or so years of what the genre was originally, which coincidentally is what I enjoyed the most. This newer design is something many MMO gamers adjusted to, but there are also many of us that would prefer something else, which is why classic launchers of older versions of MMOs are very popular. Even if we've done it before, even if there's no content that's new, it is still preferable. But that being said, there is no better or worse here. It's just what you like. It's just preference. Regardless of that preference, it is obvious there has been a shift from what made many older players fall in love with the genre. Add in, of course, something that's important to this topic is that from the early 2000s to the early 2010s, we had access to what I'm going to refer to as the concept of hope, right? Hope for the MMO genre. It seemed like every single week there was just a new game coming out. There was some new random MMORPG releasing. I spent most of my time as a kid, a teenager, and a young adult downloading these MMOs, looking for something to play for a week, a month, or sometimes finding something that I'd played for many years. These games were incredibly varied. They didn't look the same. They didn't feel the same. They weren't the same games. You always had the hope that even if the game you just downloaded, that just released, or you just discovered it, wasn't the game you're going to stick with for a long time, that the next one would be. And if not the next one, then the one after that. But there was enough releasing that you were like, oh, you know, one of these days it's going to be the one that catches me again, that makes me fall in love with the genre again for multiple years. There were simply too many games to even play all of them. I know this because I tried real hard. Hundreds and hundreds of often bad but interesting and varied games downloaded on my terrible internet connection and my tiny hard drive. But in the modern era of MMOs, we don't get very many game releases. While the rest of the industry has grown and many genres have an uptick in indie productions and just more games releasing in general, MMOs have gone the opposite way. Less big studios get involved. Indie and small studios focus on more manageable products. Of course, you know, this makes sense. But the end result is that we only get a handful of MMOs released every year. Look at any popular MMO YouTube channel and you'll see upcoming MMOs of insert year, and every year is the same games, or remove a few that already failed in development, remove a few that were cancelled, or add a few that won't release for the next 5 or 6 years. The only real exception to this is Korean MMOs. These games release. They get announced a year later, 2 years later, maybe the first year they're in Korea, the second year they're in the West, but Korean MMOs release. We get them, you know, probably 3 out of 5 of the games that we get per year is a Korean MMO. And that brings us back, you know, long roundabout to the main topic of this video, that of the few small games we release, most of them being Korean MMOs, pretty much all of them are Unreal Engine 5 now. So Korean MMOs didn't need any help in the reputation department because in the West, they're mostly negatively perceived for some reasons that I agree with and others that I think are overblown. Of course, Korea is a different market. You know, it's difficult for people to understand in the West what Korea is like, their relationship with video games compared to many of us, and they do tend to care a little bit less about pay to win, or at least they complain about it less. But despite the flaws of these games, being the only country that with any kind of consistency is releasing games to the genre, I'm never going to dismiss them out of hand because, you know, I mean, most of my life I've grown up playing Korean MMOs. Legends of Mer, Lineage, Rose Online, Fly for Fun, Silk Road, all that type of stuff. But prior to 2023, it used to be that the primary concern when an MMO was announced and had a Korean developer or publisher, that the cash shop would be the biggest issue, or, you know, maybe it's a mobile game with a PC port. Now we have those same concerns, but also that the game will be another Unreal Engine 5 clone. Now, don't get me wrong, Unreal Engine 5 looks great. When it was first announced, I remember making a video saying it could be great for the industry, and specifically for the MMO genre, because that's where I was focused, that if what they were saying were true, giving people more tools, easier to use tools, would see an uptick in the release of games, hopefully, meaning more MMOs. So in a way, we're getting exactly what I asked for. But what we're actually seeing is that we're not getting new games, are we? Because if they all look, feel, and sound the same, is it really a new game at all? Imagine this. You're an MMORPG fan. Sorry about that, by the way. Hopefully you recover soon. You wake up during the MMO winter of the 2020s to see a new MMO's been announced. It's a really fucking rare occurrence nowadays. Amazing. It isn't a Kickstarter with 2 guys shitting in a bucket in their parents' basement asking for $10 to make the next WoW killer. It's a real studio with real money. The trailer starts to play. The graphics look really nice. The world looks huge and detailed. The characters are really shiny for some reason. The combat looks fluid and fast-paced. The animations look clean. The enemies are big. It has a really generic shit name, and it's from one of the handful of Korean publishers that already broke your window a few years ago when they entered your home to steal your wallet. But it is what it is. What are you going to do? Just abandon hope that this time it will be a little bit different and just not add it to the list of upcoming disappointments. A few months later, you see another game announced. Wow, 2 MMOs announced in 1 year? Crazy. And you think, wait, did that game change their name? And no, they didn't. It's just another Unreal Engine 5 Korean MMO. It just looks identical. They use the same trailer style. Maybe they're using the same guy to make them all. They have the same looking characters, the same looking world, combat, and apparently everything else. So now fast forward some time and the first game releases. It has most the same things you expected. The cash shop is on a sliding scale of not good, but doesn't immediately impact me to holy fucking shit, this is a disgrace. The gameplay has all the usual Korean systems you expect. Dailies, upgrading gear with RNG enhancements, 700,000 materials and currencies you don't know how to use and feel too overwhelmed to keep track of. Red dots on the 900 user interface elements, the menus within menus that just want you to click on them every 2 seconds to give you a little head pat for simply existing, as well as some more currency being gifted through this system to make you feel like you're doing something, to make you feel rewarded with constant small dopamine hits so that you start feeling strong before the game inevitably makes you feel weak and directs you to the neon sign saying buy power here, and that's the cash shop. But now, instead of those being the issues that you expected, you now have new issues that are the same in every game. Absolutely awful optimization. Your whole game freezing or stuttering every time you try to open a menu. Constant lighting glitches, washed out graphics, animations, gameplay, just the game looking exactly the same, indistinguishable from the next 3 games on the horizon and the last 3 games that you played. And don't get me wrong, not all of these are Unreal Engine 5 issues. In fact, I'd hazard a guess that most of the issues aren't Unreal Engine 5 issues. It's just that the developers are using the tools in the laziest way possible, or the lack of willingness to make something that stands out from the crowd. But whatever the reason is, it doesn't change the end result. We're living in the era of the Unreal Engine 5 MMO slop RPG. And this extends to a lot of the games industry as well. This isn't specific to MMOs. In 2019 and 2020, I had a really doomer mindset about the MMO genre. And from this video, you're going to think, Kira, you still do. And fair, you know. But honestly, I do have a really open mind when it comes to all these games. I just go with the flow of waiting until they release. I mean, if you watch my reaction to a lot of the trailers when they come out for these games, I say, oh, that looks cool. I'm looking forward to playing this. You know, it'll probably have X, Y, and Z problem. But if it keeps me engaged for a couple of weeks, I don't really care. You know, just as it comes out, I'm going to play it. And maybe, you know, best case scenario, I'll play it for longer. But worst case scenario, I'm just going to have fun for a couple of weeks. I don't dismiss these games out of hand, but I do recognize the problems. I think it's best to, you know, judge games on what they are, what they're trying to do, how well they execute what they're trying to do, and then decide whether or not it's for me. And most of the time, these games are not. I'm not naive enough to think it's going to be different every time because, you know, historically it hasn't been, but I do hope that it will be. That being said, this is a really worrying trend. You know, we're starting to really notice this because every game that's announced and every game that arrives from Korea, which again is really the only region that's even giving us MMOs in the first place, is just exactly the same. They're legitimately indistinguishable from each other. Some of them have a very slightly different aesthetic, but all the UI elements, like everything you're seeing on your screen, everything you're doing in the game, if you put your tongue on it, it's still vanilla ice cream. There's just, you know, slightly more cream, slightly more sugar, or slightly more vanilla. It's still vanilla ice cream. But this is honestly starting to become a worrying trend, that the 4 or 5 game releases per year we might have gotten in the genre previously are going to turn into 4 or 5 almost identical games instead, due to whatever is causing this homogenized style. And it's not just the style, of course. The tech problems are the same every time, which, when they're causing you problems, makes the game feel even more the same. And as somebody who does review these games, it makes it hard to go in with an open mind when it feels like and it looks like you're just playing the same game you played 3 months ago with only a slightly different flavor, or plus or minus a few different systems. Maybe this one's got autoplay, maybe this one doesn't. Amazing. So I can end this with some member berries. I remember the first time I played Ultima Online in the late 90s, I was a child. I remember thinking to myself, wow, if this is what games are like now, imagine what they'll be like in 10 or 20 years. here we are, coming up to 30 years since that game released, and childhood me would be incredibly disappointed. Now, I know I'm not a child anymore, at least not physically, but I think it is observable that we have less games in this genre, and it will be a real shame if the trend of the games we do get end up being basically the same as the ones we've just had released, and the ones going forward are the same as those as well. I don't think every game should be, you know, the pander to the older crowd and be this super hardcore or difficult sandbox or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. And obviously the MMO audience in general, when a new game releases, there are a lot of negative comments, trust me. You know, I read them, I see them on my channel all the time whenever I talk about a new trailer or whatever. We are just those old cynical men, I guess. But at the same time, it doesn't change that we feel this way for a reason. I obviously miss the admittedly unsustainable times of the 2000s where I could open up the MMORPG.com website, go to the new releases list and take my pick of hundreds of relatively new and obscure MMOs ranging from every flavor of ice cream, all with varying size communities, vastly different visuals and gameplay. And I have to hope that this is just short-term growing pains, and it's just luck that the games that we've had recently, the games that we've had announced that are going to release from these Korean publishers and some Western ones admittedly as well, are just going through the growing pains of using Unreal Engine 5, and as it develops, the people using it figure out how to differentiate between what they're making and what is available, as well as put more emphasis on the difficult parts of game development, not just lazily using features that make things easier at the cost of massive performance issues. If not, we could end up seeing the same cycle as we saw with Unreal Engine 3, where every single MMO that launched using that engine had, funnily enough, the exact same issues we're seeing now, even down to the menu opening lag and the poor performance despite advanced hardware and dated graphics of the game. If not, we might be living in the cursed monkey paw future of, oh gee golly, I hope we get more MMOs now that they're easy to make with Unreal Engine 5, and here we are. So either way, let's see what happens in the future, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.